The RetroTINK 4K is doomed. Hey there, Vince here, and welcome to yet another Circuit Rewind. It's the new year, and that means new toys and new fun to be had. I lucked out and got myself a RetroTINK 4K, so I have a lot of experience over the years fighting for tickets for conventions like PAX and BlizzCon. So I'm used to the grind of, mashing F5 and checking out as quickly as possible to be, make sure I get what I need. And so all that experience allowed me to get a RetroTINK 4K because holy crap was that a pain in the ass. I was able to get in and check out right there at the very beginning, and I was also, because of that, one of the very first people to actually receive theirs in the mail. So yeah, I bought this thing. It was $750 here in the US, and here it is. In the next few videos, I'm going to go into more detail about features and reviewing this thing fully, but today I really only have one mission. That is, does this thing play Doom? Because everything needs to play Doom, right? Sadly, Mike Chi hasn't given us the ability to run custom cores on the FPGA or to run custom software on this thing, so I can't play Doom on this thing directly. But this is an upscaler for virtually every game console and PC ever made at this point, so let's plug in every console and PC ever made and play virtually every port of Doom that I can get my hands on in short order. All right, let's hop over to that now. The first game up most certainly has no right to actually exist, but I'm most certainly glad that it does. The SNES port of Doom is an absolute technical masterpiece of cranking out every last frame from this console's woefully underpowered processor for this task. Part of how this port works, using a very low resolution rendering. On top of that, there's also a black border surrounding the entire screen, so if you're wondering why it's not filling up the whole frame, that's because on the actual Super Nintendo, this game has this giant massive black border all the way around it, and this is actually how it's represented. I'm sure it goes without saying, there are a lot of textures missing and even walls missing in this version to make it work on the Super Nintendo. And by Super Nintendo, I actually mean the analog Super NT, because I don't actually have a Super Nintendo here to play with at the moment. And now probably the ugliest Doom Guy portrait out of any of these games. Like, I don't know what they were thinking when they made the 32X game, but they did this really weird color grading with this portrait, and it just looks really, really weird, and I've never liked it. So I don't actually own a Sega Genesis. However, I have the analog Mega SG, but to make that work with the 32X, you have to run the video out from the Mega SG into the analog DAC, out from that back into the 32X, and then out from there to whatever scaler you have to be using, and in my case, the RetroTINK 4K. I have a bit of a cabling issue right now, so that's causing the noise that you're seeing on the screen, but even with that noise, the RetroTINK 4K is doing an amazing job of making this look pixel perfect, again, other than that noise. Okay, enough of that. Let's try out Doom 32X Resurrection, a modern port of Doom based on the Atari Jaguar codebase with new features and heavily optimized to flat out not suck. This version runs actually in full screen finally, performance is great, and it looks absolutely beautiful. One thing to note, I have not yet optimized my wiring setup for the RetroTINK 4K, and this console really shows off some of the noise in my cheap-ass wiring setup. But like the standard 32X version, this is using the janky setup of the Mega SG, through the DAC, through the 32X, and then into the RetroTINK. Please excuse how bad I am at playing this version of the game though. Using the Genesis controller doesn't work too well for games like this because you have to hold a button to switch between turning left and right, and then strafing left and right. It's kind of a pain, really. An interesting note with these console ports is the maps are slightly changed. So like in this final room here, you'll notice that the exit panel is at ground level rather than being like a small little hole you have to fall into. Doom on the Sega Saturn has one of the coolest looking HUDs of any of the ports. This Doom Guy portrait is probably my favorite out of all of them. But notice the performance? The 32X version, I think even without the Resurrection modification, ran faster than this. However, this one does run at a much higher resolution for clearer graphics. So I guess it matters if you want pretty or fast. This was also the first recording that I did where I cleaned up the noise in the video line by doing some cable rewiring. And this just looks absolutely gorgeous. Plus the upscaler just makes this look extra crispy and clean. Also, you'll notice here in this room, this is another great example of maps that have been modified, as the acid pit in the middle is completely missing. And thankfully, the Sega Saturn controllers have L and R buttons, which means we can now turn and strafe at the same time, without worrying about having to hold down a button to be able to do that. Thank you! Finally, I have a competent controller. An interesting note for this section right here is you can see how dark it is. I played through this on several different consoles, and on some of them, that room specifically was absolutely pitch black where you had to turn on the map to even see which way you were going, and it was just frustrating. Luckily, the Saturn version here, you can actually see what the hell you're doing. Opening door has to be the lowest frame rate experience in this entire version. It's also really hard to aim at low frame rate. The RetroTINK 4K can output 4K, obviously, at 60 frames a second, or it can also do 1080p at 120 frames a second. I don't think that frame rate matters at all for games like this right now. I'm getting, what, maybe 5-10 frames a second at parts of this right here? The GameCube Game Boy player with the GBA port. This is ugly. Need I say more? It looks like the GameCube is doing bilinear stretching of the Game Boy images, which just makes this look like a smeary mess. Now the GBA game running through the analog pocket. It's noticeably brighter, and it's definitely much clearer. I'm sure with some gamma correction we can fix the brightness issue though. GBA games love to overcompensate on the brightness because of how terrible the GBA screen actually was. And now for the Atari Jaguar port. This is the version that almost all other ports are based off of, except for one really crucial feature that this specific version is missing. Where's the music? Otherwise, this version looks absolutely amazing, and the Tink is upscaling this thing absolutely beautifully. Like, this is pixel perfect, crystal clear sharpness, and this is like exactly what we want to see. Don't fault me here. The Atari controller is actually quite terrible. Oh hey, there's the music finally. And now we have the original Xbox. This version of the game runs flawlessly. And there's a reason for that. Doom was developed for 486 PCs. Like, if you had a 33 megahertz PC, it ran. And if you had a 66 megahertz PC, it ran really well. Well, this is a 733 megahertz console, so even running fully software rendered, this is 10 times the performance of what the game was intended to run at. On top of that, several processor generations have changed. So it went from 486 to Pentium, Pentium 2, and now Pentium 3 is what this is running on. I also have the Xbox 360 and the PS3 ports, but I figured that this already being basically a perfect copy, and at that point you're running dual analog sticks, they all have basically the same controller scheme, that having all three of them in here would look virtually identical. They're all going to run at the same resolution, the same frame rate, like they're all going to be basically the exact same experience at this point. Something that I've noticed with the RetroTINK 4K is when you're dealing with higher resolution content like this, it no longer does pixel perfect sampling of the content. I noticed this specifically when I was working on one of my PCs that output 720p content, and it was giving me more of a bilinear filtering type upscaling rather than a pixel perfect sharp upscaling. And I think I'm seeing the same thing here with this, which I believe was running at 480p when I captured this video. So like I said, despite acquiring the Xbox 360 and the PS3 versions of Doom, I've opted not to record them and show them here because ultimately it's going to look exactly the same as this does. This room is such a pain in the butt to navigate. Damn, I almost got par. Too bad I got lost in there for a little bit. Now, going back to the beginning of the game, because I didn't want to play through this one all the way, it was really, really terrible to play, we have Doom on the 3DO using S-Video output. What happened to the pillars in this first room? They're just kind of missing? Right now, the RetroTINK 4K is focused primarily on RGB, component, or HDMI video, so we don't have optimal sampling timings yet for S-Video or composite video input. This version of the game runs at a low resolution, inside of a small box, low frame rate, with a terrible controller, and even then, HUD elements like the percentage sign there isn't even properly aligned where it should be. It's overlapping the borders of the HUD elements. This is a very cheap, poorly done port of Doom. I'm going to call this section the slideshow staircase. So something I noticed when I was playing, the AI for the most part really didn't shoot at me all that often, so I wanted to test it. So what I decided to do was to sit here for several minutes, waiting and waiting and waiting to see how long it would take for me to actually die standing right in front of an imp. And this was excruciatingly a long period of time. The imp dance is finally over, and I've finally been put out of my misery. I have one last game to showcase, but this time around, it is not a port of classic Doom. This is wholly within its own original game, based off of Doom. But what is it? If you've never tried it before, I highly recommend playing Doom 64. This is a very unique Doom experience, and it is significantly more challenging than some of the other Doom games that are out there. Also, if you thought Doom 3 was dark, watch as I turn the brightness all the way up, and this is still a ridiculously dark game. Look at this. I'm only in the second room of the game, and I'm already facing off with a pinky. Like, that should give you some idea of what they designed for the difficulty of this game. So if the name wasn't obvious, this game, Doom 64, runs on the Nintendo 64. And in my case, I have an RGB modded console. The RetroTINK is handling this absolutely flawlessly. This looks freaking amazing. I love it. This is, out of all of the games I've tested, probably my favorite looking out of all of them. And despite playing this level a couple times before actually doing the recording, I'm still getting myself turned around and getting lost just looking for the damn blue key. Like, come on Vince, you know what you're doing. Most of this is me forgetting which button is the actual use or activate button to, activate the lift. And then I don't use it, because I'm an idiot. There it is. Oh hey, that's right, there's a map, just like every other Doom game, to show me where I need to go. Oh crap, more surprise pinkies. Ah! And yes, they even raised some gates. So if you didn't want to fight them and just run away, you don't even have an option. Doom doesn't have a jump button, but it certainly has a run button. Who just leaves barrels in the way like this? Ugh. What, another room full of pinkies? So all of that was just the first level of Doom 64. That is how freakishly awesome this game is. And don't steal my passcode, that's mine, not yours. Get your own. Well, that's all the consoles. I hope you enjoyed all that. Whatever the YouTube people say, like, follow, subscribe, bell, ding-a-ding thing, I don't know, because I have some really cool projects in the works that you're gonna love. Like, this bad boy right here can fit so much content. That's gonna be my 2024 project for the year. It's gonna take all year for me to work on this thing slowly. And that will be hooked up to this eventually to do some really, really cool retro gaming. So stick around for that. Plus, I have a lot of consoles that I want to go through and figure out how to get them best to work with this. Because right now, this doesn't have all the features that I want, but I know with how harsh I was with the RetroTINK 5X release, most of my criticisms for that were corrected over time in firmware updates. And Mike Chia said that this thing has something like 10 years worth of firmware updates that he can potentially do for this. So I can't say too much critical of this thing right now because I know whatever I don't like, he's probably already aware of and already working on once he, deals with the backlog of shipping, which is somebody buy that man a drink. Later.